Hello, how are you doing? I'm very excited because soon I will be going on holiday. I'll be on holiday for just over a week's time. I've been so busy with work recently. I can't wait to get some really quality reading time in. And this holiday is going to involve a lot of train journeys, which means a lot of reading time if I'm not too distracted by the beautiful views outside the train window. And of course, the best thing about getting ready for a holiday is deciding what I'm going to read. So I have just over a dozen brand new books that have just been published in the past few weeks. Some new fiction by debut authors, by some authors I've read before, some new nonfiction as well. So I'm going to go through all of these titles and discuss why I'm so interested in them. And I'd love to know if you'd like to read any of these books yourself, or if you have read them, tell me what you think about them, if you'd recommend them. But before I get into the books, I want to say this video is very kindly sponsored by Serious Readers, who create these excellent reading lights that I really enjoy using. So more about them in a few minutes. The first book I want to talk about is Small Worlds by Caleb Azumah Nelson. Yes, his new novel is finally here. This is his second novel after his brilliant and wonderful debut, Open Water, which I found so moving and incredible. And this is the story of a young black man who lives in London and who lives for dancing and music. That's just kind of his whole world, in clubs and in the privacy of home, just listening to music himself and dancing in his room. But then when he starts speaking more with his father about sacrifices that his father has made, he starts pondering more about his heritage. And so this novel follows a few years in his life as he's exploring his background and his identity. It moves between London and Ghana, and I just can't wait to dive into this new novel. Next, I have Linda Grant's new novel, The Story of the Forest. And I've read a few books by Linda Grant before. She's a really interesting fiction writer, but what really drew me to this story was that I think it begins in Latvia. And if you've watched my videos in the past, I have some Latvian heritage, and because of my YouTube channel here, I actually got to go on a trip to Riga to meet a long-lost cousin of mine and to learn about Latvian literature. That happened a few years ago. But this novel begins in 1913 on the coast of the Baltic Sea, where an innocent girl goes into the forest and meets there a group of revolutionary men who change her idea of the world and how to live in society, and it makes her embark on this whole journey to England, to Liverpool, but also to London. So exploring the different political ideologies in the world at the time, but also her development as an individual. And it has this really striking and colorful cover. August Blue by Deborah Levy. This is a novel about two women who meet by chance in a marketplace and see likenesses of themselves in the other. So it's this kind of doubling effect, and this leads to an exploration of identity and how much our lives are influenced by the people we encounter and the people that are close to us in our lives. Now, Deborah Levy is such a fascinating writer. I've read a number of her books, and it is sometimes said of Deborah Levy that her nonfiction, her living autobiographical trilogy, is better than her fiction. And probably for the most part, I'm inclined to agree with that. I've enjoyed those nonfiction books more than her fiction, but I have found her fiction really interesting, especially her novel Hot Milk. Some of her other novels didn't work as well for me, but I've seen really great reviews of this new novel, which makes me so much more excited to read it. Then I have a reprint of a so-called lost dystopian classic called Termush by by Sven Holm, and this novel was first published in 1967. It follows the lives of a number of people who have realized that the kind of apocalypse is coming, so they invested in this facility which will keep them safe and allow them to live after the apocalypse happens, and that's exactly what occurs. But as time goes on, the life in this facility where they're living becomes more strained as resources become more strained, and there's more of like a lockdown. Their lives become regimented as certain rules apply to them, and people who are outside the facility want to get inside of it. This is described as a kind of post-apocalyptic White Lotus because they're all residing in this luxury type hotel and facility in this post-apocalyptic landscape. That makes me so fascinated to read it. This new edition comes with an introduction by Jeff Vandermeer, and it's quite a short novel, a debut novel called Western Lane by Chetna Maroo. This is the story of an 8-year-old girl who's a very talented squash player, and when her mother dies, she completely throws herself into this game of squash, and her father really encourages her to become a champion and a great player. So it's a kind of coming of age story that's also about grief and ambition, and it has this absolutely beautiful cover to it. The great writer Yi-Yun Lee says of this book, it's a novel in which we linger on every breathing line and relish every close observation. What an exceptionally talented writer Chetna Maroo is. Thirst for Salt by Madelaine Lucas. This is a novel about a young woman who's 24 years old and just finished her student life and is ready to embark on whatever life holds, but she's not certain what that is. And one summer, she meets an older man who she starts having an affair with, and starts looking to him for guidance in a way that she never really got from her own parents. But then she discovers something which calls into question all of her decisions and the direction which her life is taking. As I mentioned in the beginning, this video is very kindly sponsored by Serious Readers, a company that creates high-quality reading lights for indoor use. I have been using this lamp from them for the past several months, and it's honestly great for reading, especially in this room, which doesn't receive all that much natural light, so it helps me to see the pages much more clearly. And this is also the space I come to in the middle of the night when I can't sleep. The overhead light is way too harsh, so the Serious light helps me to only illuminate the book, and it does so much better than any other kind of lighting I've tried. I mean, I once got one of those little lamps that you can clip on to a book, but I found this really awkward to use and the light was way too bright. The great thing about Serious lights is that they replicate the daylight spectrum as closely as technically possible with what they call daylight wavelength technology. So the light feels warm and natural. I have a high definition table light in white with a lightweight base. Its neck is very easy to manipulate and angle, so it shines exactly where I want it. Additionally, there's a dimmer switch, so I can easily make the light brighter or weaker, and I can also adjust the beam width, so more or less space is illuminated. I'll put a link to the Serious Readers website in the description below so you can go and check them out for yourself. And if you decide to buy one, I have a special offer for you. Be sure to enter the offer code SR312 when checking out, as this will give you £100 off a high-definition light. The offer code also provides you with free international shipping. So if you are looking for an excellent new reading light, either for yourself or to give as a gift, I'd really recommend Serious Readers. And now, back to the book. books. I have a few new Irish books, and I love new Irish literature. So to start off, there is a new novel by Sarah Gilmartin called Service, which is a story told in 3 different parts. So there's a woman who used to work for a famous chef, and when she discovers in the news that this famous chef has had charges brought against him for sexual misconduct, she thinks back to her time working with him and starts reevaluating that. So we get her perspective, but we also get the perspective of this chef who is having these accusations lobbed at him right when he's achieved kind of the pinnacle of his career. But we also get the perspective of this chef's wife, and having supported him for many years, she has a very different perspective on both him and all of these events. So it's looking at these different points of view to try to find the truth somewhere in between them. And I love novels that do this, that make us as readers like guess, who are we going to believe and what is the truth behind all of these events. I think it sounds so fascinating, and I loved Sarah Gilmartin's previous novel, Dinner Party. I thought that was really excellent. So very excited for her new fiction. Next is a new novel by a very respected writer, Claire Kilroy, called Soldier Sailor, and this is the author's first novel in a decade. I don't think I've read anything else by her, but this comes with so much praise by some of the greatest current Irish writers who I really trust. So very excited to read this novel, which is the story of a woman who is a new mother. She's just given birth to a baby that she's called Sailor, and it's about her fierce love for this baby, but also how becoming a new mother causes her to question her own identity, and she has to readjust to this new way of life, and has a real difficult time doing so, and kind of broods upon ideas of self-destruction. So following this very tender and moving story of new motherhood. Then there is a memoir, Cacophony of Bone, by Kerri ní Dochartaigh, and this is looking at a year in the author's life when she and her partner moved to a rural part of Ireland to start a new life for themselves, but this happened towards the end of 2019, just before the pandemic occurred. So it's following this year of uncertainties and how things turn out much differently than they planned when they moved to this location. It's a meditation both on life and the physical landscape. This author is meant to write about the beauty of the natural environment in such a striking way. She was given a special commendation at the Wainwright Prize, which is a nature writing prize that I enjoy following for her previous book. And the great author Doreen Negrifa says of this book, "Each moment is deeply felt, and each page is written with such nimble meticulousness. Cacophony of Bone is neat as a robin's egg and just as wondrous." And look at how beautiful this cover is. There's a new nonfiction book called Taking Flight by Lev Parikian, and this book looks at 14 different flying species from very different periods of time in the world's history. So from some of the first flying species 300 million years ago up until species more in our present time, and how we have related to these flying species over time, and just the wondrousness and beauty of these creatures. Keeping on the nature theme, there is a new novel that sounds so good called Fowl Eulogies by Lucie, Rico, and this is a story of a young woman who lives in the city and she's a vegetarian, but when her mother dies, she returns to the poultry farm that she grew up on, and she takes over the business, and she starts making changes to the business, including sending out with every chicken that is sent to a shop an individual biography of that chicken's life, and this starts causing problems in her business and within her community. So it's following this story. And actually, I just a few days ago I was having brunch with a friend of mine who raises urban chickens, and she was telling me this story about how she found one of her chickens dead in a very mysterious way, where the chicken's head was buried in the dirt, and she was describing how this was such a mysterious death. And so I couldn't help making a slight pun joke by saying, "Oh, do you suspect foul play?" So I know that is so corny of me, isn't it? But anyway, yes, this new novel sounds so good. The Drinker of Horizons. This is a historical novel set in Gaza, which was one of the last pre-colonial African kingdoms, and it follows the story of a young woman from Gaza who's enlisted as an interpreter on a ship, and she falls for a Portuguese sergeant, and on that ship is held captive the last emperor of Gaza and his many wives. And so it's following this journey from Gaza to Portugal and how her life is forever changed by these events. Patricia Wants to Cuddle by Samantha Allen. This is a novel about a woman named Mirinae who's chosen as one of the final contestants for this reality game show called The Catch. And so she and the other finalists for this reality competition go to this remote wooded island where they gradually discover that their final elimination might be more sinister than they first thought. And you can see in this cover, there are kind of splatters of blood overlaid on the hair and the image of this cover. So yeah, so it sounds like quite a creepy story. And also the author, Kristen Arnett, says of this book that it is a queer romp with a bombshell of an ending. So I think this sounds like such an enticing story. And keeping with more sinister fiction, there's a new collection of short stories from Argentina called 19 Claws and a Blackbird by an author who seems to be part of a whole Argentinian movement of writing that is really exploring kind of the darker side of life. These stories are obviously about a whole range of characters and subject matter, but explore issues to do with human monstrousness, which I think sounds so interesting. And finally, I have a debut novel called 8 Lives of a Century-Old Trickster by Mirinae Lee. So this is a proof of this novel, and this is the finished copy of it. And this story is about an elderly woman named Ms. Mook who lives in a retirement facility, and she starts speaking to people about her life and all of the events she's lived through. And as people are listening to this, they start to realize there is no way this one woman could have lived through all of these different wars and romantic encounters and events throughout history. She must be describing many different lives she's lived through, or are these just her own imaginings of what she's lived through. And I do love fiction that looks at these kind of possibilities of past lives, because it seems to me like this interesting way of exploring identity and the malleability of our identity as we think how we might have inhabited different individuals throughout different periods of history. So I'm really looking forward to reading this story and all of these other books, but I have to pick and choose what I'm going to bring with me on my holiday, because obviously I can't bring everything. Otherwise, I'm going to be completely weighed down in books, but it's a wonderful choice to make. But if you have any suggestions of what you think I should pick to read on my holiday, please let me know in the comments below, or which of these books you're most interested in reading, or if you've read any of them, or if you have any new books of your own that you're really excited to read, whether you've bought them or got them from a library. I just love hearing about the books on your TBR that you're most looking forward to reading. But I hope you're doing well and reading good things, and that you get some relaxing reading time. And I will speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.